Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at election integrity. More specifically, we're going to be zeroing in on Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, and the efforts of one resident to keep the voter rolls accurate. And this should be interesting because it's a lot more complex than you might think.
Yeah, it is. And what's captivating about this deep dive is that it's a great example of how passionate citizens can get involved in the electoral process.
Yeah.
We often talk about voting, but maintaining accurate voter rolls is just as crucial for fair elections.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what we're going to be looking into today in this deep dive is how does that process work? What's the legal framework around that? And what role can private citizens play in all this? Yeah. And we've got some fascinating source material. We're going to be talking about Deborah Austin, a resident of Cumberland County who took a very proactive approach to voter roll maintenance.
Yeah, and her story kind of highlights the complexities of this issue. But maybe before we jump into that, let's sort of start with the big picture. Did you know that a 2012 study found 24 million invalid voter registrations and 2.74 million people registered in multiple states?
Wow, 24 million. That's a huge number. So, I mean, that makes you wonder, how do these inaccuracies happen and what are the implications of this?
Well, it's a multifaceted issue. People move, they pass away, they become ineligible to vote for various reasons. So keeping up with these changes is a constant challenge for election officials. And as you can imagine, inaccurate voter rolls can have serious consequences.
Like what?
Well, imagine a scenario where a district has a significant number of ineligible voters on the rolls, right? So their votes could potentially dilute the impact of legitimate votes, skewing election results. And this not only undermines the fairness of the election, but also erodes public trust in the entire system. People need to believe that their votes count and that the system is secure.
That makes total sense. So how do we prevent this from happening? What safeguards are in place to ensure that these voter rolls are accurate?
Well, that's where the National Voter Registration Act of 1993 comes in. It's often referred to as the NVRA. And this federal law mandates that states maintain accurate voter rolls, but it also creates a delicate balancing act.
Okay. Tell me about this balancing act.
Well, on the one hand, the NVRA aims to protect the right to vote by ensuring that eligible voters aren't wrongly removed from the rolls. But on the other hand, it also requires states to have procedures in place for removing ineligible voters, such as those who've moved out of state or passed away.
So it's a real tightrope walk between accuracy and accessibility.
It is, and there's a lot of debate about how effective it is in practice. Some argue that the NVRA's safeguards are too stringent, making it difficult to remove ineligible voters and potentially leaving the door open for errors or even fraud. Others argue that, making it too easy to remove voters could lead to the disenfranchisement of eligible citizens.
Yeah, sounds like a really tough issue. No easy answers.
Yeah.
So how does this all play out in Pennsylvania specifically? What's their process for maintaining accurate voter rolls?
Well, Pennsylvania, like all states, has to comply with the NVRA, and they have a routine process for cleaning up voter rolls after every federal election, which is actually considered best practice. They use a combination of methods to identify inactive voters, including return mail and change of address data.
Interesting. So what happens when they identify an inactive voter? Did they just remove them from the rolls automatically?
Not quite. Pennsylvania has specific timelines in place to protect voters' rights. If a voter doesn't respond to notifications about moving, they can be removed after 4 years. And if they become inactive without moving, it can take up to 9 years.
9 years. That seems like a long time. Why so long?
Well, it's all about balancing the need for accuracy with the risk of disenfranchisement. The longer time frame for inactive voters who haven't moved is meant to ensure that people who might vote infrequently aren't wrongly removed from the rolls. It's a cautious approach. But some argue that it's too slow, potentially leaving the rolls bloated with ineligible voters.
I see how this gets tricky. So where does Deb Austin fit into all of this? You mentioned she took a proactive approach to voter roll maintenance in Cumberland County.
That's right. She's a retired resident who got involved in local elections, specifically focusing on the accuracy of voter rolls in her county. What's really fascinating about her story is that she didn't just sit back and wait for the county to handle it. She took action.
So she took action. What did that look like?
Well, she dove deep into publicly available records, specifically using the National Change of Address database to identify voters who appeared to have moved out of state.
Okay.
And then she took the initiative to contact those voters directly.
She contacted them personally?
Yeah.
That seems like a lot of work.
It was quite a bit. Deb was committed to this effort. She didn't just send a casual email or make a quick phone call. She mailed them official forms to request removal from Pennsylvania's voter rolls, and even included prepaid envelopes to make the process as easy as possible.
Wow. She really went the extra mile. It sounds like she was very passionate about making sure these voter rolls were accurate.
Right.
So what was the reaction to her efforts? Did the county appreciate her initiative?
Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. While some residents may have appreciated her efforts, the county's election director, Bethany Salcerulo, declined to remove voters solely based on the change of address data Deb provided.
Why not? I mean, it seems like that information would be pretty reliable.
Well, Salcerulo had some valid concerns. She pointed out that using change of address data alone could potentially lead to the disenfranchisement of legitimate voters. For example, military personnel, college students, and people who work in other states often maintain a residence in Pennsylvania. They might have filed a change of address for convenience, but they still have the right to vote in Pennsylvania.
Ah, I see. So removing them based solely on a change of address could create some problems. It's like that balancing act we talked about earlier, try and maintain accuracy without disenfranchising anyone.
Exactly, it's a delicate process, and election officials have to be cautious. Salcerulo also mentioned that Deb's letters caused some confusion among voters, They received these official-looking forms in the mail and weren't sure what to do with them.
Yeah, I can imagine that being a little unsettling. Did it cause any major disruptions for the county?
It did. It actually led to an influx of calls to the election office from concerned voters. They were understandably confused and wanted a clarification. So this influx of calls created extra work for election officials, potentially distracting them from other important tasks.
So while her intentions were good, her actions inadvertently created some challenges for the county. It seems like there are a lot of different perspectives on how voter roll maintenance should be handled. What are some of the key arguments from those who believe the process needs to be more proactive?
Well, one of our sources is an article titled "Clean Up Voter Rolls Before Every Election." And it argues that outdated voter rolls can lead to a range of problems, including increased opportunities for fraud and the dilution of legitimate votes. They advocate for more frequent and thorough purges of inactive voters, using a variety of data points to verify residency.
Okay, so if someone has moved out of state and hasn't voted in years, it seems logical to remove them from the rolls. But what about the concerns about disenfranchising legitimate voters? How do they address that?
They argue that the safeguards in the NVRA are already sufficient to protect voters' rights. The law requires that voters be notified multiple times before being removed from the rolls, and they have the opportunity to appeal any decision. They believe that the risk of disenfranchisement is minimal compared to the potential problems caused by inaccurate voter rolls.
So it's a matter of weighing the risks and benefits. What are some of the counter-arguments from those who believe that the current system is adequate?
Well, another one of our sources, an article from WITF titled "Pana County's Clean Voter Rolls, Election Skeptics Praise Routine Process," highlights the importance of following established procedures and respecting voters' rights. They emphasize that election officials are already doing a good job of maintaining accurate voter rolls within the legal framework of the NVRA.
So they believe that the current system, with its safeguards and timelines, strikes the right balance.
Exactly. They argue that more aggressive purges could lead to eligible voters being wrongly removed from the rolls, particularly those who might move frequently or vote infrequently. They also point out that the vast majority of registered voters are legitimate, and that instances of voter fraud are extremely rare.
It's fascinating to see how these different perspectives play out. It seems like there's no easy solution when it comes to voter roll maintenance. What are your thoughts on all of this, having looked into all this research?
Well, what stands out to me is that this debate really boils down to a fundamental question. How do we balance the need for accuracy with the importance of protecting voting rights? It's a question that every state grapples with, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
It sounds like finding that right balance is really key. So how do we do that? Where do we go from here? What are some potential solutions or paths forward when it comes to voter roll maintenance?
Well, it starts with recognizing that this is an ongoing conversation, not a problem with a quick fix. We need a multifaceted approach that involves continuous improvement, transparency, and open dialogue.
What do you mean by continuous improvement?
Well, election systems are constantly evolving, right? So we need to invest in technology and training to ensure that election officials have the resources they need to maintain accurate voter rolls. This includes using data analytics and other tools to identify potential inaccuracies and streamline the process of updating records.
Okay, that makes sense. Technology can play a huge role in improving efficiency and accuracy. But what about transparency? How can we ensure that this process is open and accountable to the public?
Well, transparency is crucial for building trust. States should make information about their voter registration and maintenance processes easily accessible to the public. This includes things like publishing statistics on voter registration rates, the number of inactive voters, and the methods used to verify residency.
Okay, so let's go back to Deb Austin and what she did in Cumberland County. What are some of the key takeaways from her story, and what does it mean for people who want to get involved?
Well, Austin's story really shows that everyday citizens can play an active role in ensuring election integrity. You can make a difference by engaging with your local election officials and pushing for improvements.
It's inspiring to see someone like her step up and actually make a difference. It shows that we don't have to just sit back and wait for someone else to fix things.
That's right. And it's also a good reminder that it's important to understand the laws and processes around voter registration and maintenance. You need to know the rules of the game before you can play it.
Right. And this whole situation shows how important open communication is between citizens, election officials, and lawmakers. It really takes everyone working together.
Absolutely.
So what role do private citizens play in all this? Is there anything we can do beyond just staying informed?
Citizen engagement is crucial. Start by educating yourself about the voter registration and maintenance processes in your own state. Attend local government meetings, ask questions, and make your voice heard.
Don't just sit on the sidelines, get involved. What else can we do?
Consider volunteering as a poll worker or working with a nonpartisan organization that promotes voter education. You can even reach out to your elected officials and let them know that election integrity is important to you. Every voice and every action contributes to a stronger democracy.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic takeaway for our listeners. Your vote is your voice, and it's important to make sure that voice is heard. But it goes beyond just casting a ballot. We can all play a role in ensuring that our elections are fair, accurate, and reflect the will of the people.
Exactly. It's about being active participants in our democracy. And that starts with understanding the processes, engaging in thoughtful conversations, and working together to find solutions.
Well said. So to wrap things up, what's that one thought-provoking question that our listeners can ponder as they continue their own deep dive into election integrity?
How can we create a culture of informed engagement and collaboration when it comes to elections? How can we move beyond partisan divides and work together to ensure that every vote is counted accurately and fairly?
It's a question worth asking ourselves.
Absolutely.
And it's a conversation worth continuing. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of election integrity. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep.